Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Theory of Circulation by Respiration by Emma Willard, published in 1861. If you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 4, Episode 83. This work was written quite some time ago and therefore does not necessarily reflect current-day outlooks and language choices. It may include stereotyping based on race, class, and gender. The scientific texts may use outdated terminology or be inaccurate in light of more recent discoveries. This podcast was created primarily to help you relax and to entertain you. The texts are chosen for their ability to charm and interest you, rather than for educational purposes. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, it would help other listeners find us. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Section 3 includes uses of the theory, proofs, publication of a work in 1849 entitled Respiration and its Effects, more especially in relation to Asiatic Cholera and other sinking diseases. Examples. To Dr. Macy. The theory of the two chief motive powers which operate at the center was, we conceive, completed by the addition of steam formed in the vacuum of the lungs as available to give to the blood its due velocity. We also believe that complete proof a priori had been adduced of the fallacy of the theory that the primum mobile is in the heart, and also that proof a priori had been given that it begins at the lungs and is the product of respiration. It remained to apply this theory to use and to find proofs a posteriori. Although some of my friends regarded my theory as an ignis fatuus, which led me into nothing but evil, yet it has enabled me, by plans of exercise, to endure for many years indoor sedentary labor and yet enjoy health, and in unusual emergencies more than once to save my own life and that of others. In the cold winter of 1835, I took, at Troy, the old summer stage, at midnight, to cross the Green Mountains. I was alone in the large and ill-closed vehicle. The thermometer was sinking as I proceeded on my way until it had reached 25 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, a degree of cold to which I had never before been subjected. When I had traveled alone 20 miles, I found myself in imminent danger of perishing. Ordinary expedients to get warmth were no longer availing. numbness and cold at the vitals were overcoming me, and I knew that to give way to them was to die. I thought of my theory, but I was fearful that I should commit sin if I tampered with the sacred breath of life. But my necessity was urgent, and I aroused, stood up, and breathed that dense air with violence. It felt for the moment cold to my lungs, but soon came heat with a rush, and with it pain, as if the whole surface of the throat and lungs were blistered, and my first thought was that I should die, justly punished for my temerity. But soon I was restored to genial warmth, and rejoiced in having successfully made an important physiological experiment. Afterwards, having been instrumental in relieving a woman who was perishing from having breathed the fumes of charcoal, I was led to reflect that in such cases there was something to be taken away from the lungs, as well as warmth to be added. This woman's extreme coldness and feeble fluttering pulse showed that she was dying for want of right breathing, and in her case there was no doubt that the cause was the same as that of death by drowning. The carbonic acid gas which she had inspired, being heavier than atmospheric air, settled as water in her lungs, and in the same manner prevented the access of oxygen to their living tissues, and hence arose the reflection that the ordinary carbonic acid gas, which is always the residuum of respiration, might, from weakness, settle in the lungs, and thus become the cause of disease and death. The presence of carbonic acid in the lower bronchial tubes and cells, existing in quantities sufficient to prevent the natural combustion by breathing, was brought to my mind in March 1847, while searching for the cause of an agonizing paroxysm of sick headache. The distressed feelings of obstructed life with which I was tossing and struggling, together with the agonizing pain in the head and pressure on the stomach, might well arise from such a cause. Standing, for position is important, in a full current of air from an open window, I commenced a species of violent artificial breathing for the purpose of ejecting the supposed heavy gas and filling my lungs with pure air. This was done by contracting the chest on every side to its smallest possible dimensions, and at the same time throwing out the air violently and from the bottom of the thorax, as if under the operation of an emetic. Then alternating by opening the chest to its greatest capacity and drawing in, by successive inhalations, all the fresh air possible, and pressing it down to the lowest depths of the lungs. This process at first gave such intensity and sharpness to the pain in the head that it required much resolution to continue it. Nevertheless, it was persevered in. After a few minutes, the pain diminished, and soon entirely ceased. This was followed by free perspiration and equalized warmth and circulation. Perfect repose and quiet sleep ensued. Friends, who a short time before had seen a countenance like that of a dying person, and knew how slow was ordinary cure, were astonished an hour afterwards to behold, on my waking, the full glow of restored health. Footnote 6. One of them, my lamented niece, Jane Porter Lincoln, at my request, immediately wrote an account of the experiment, which is now in my possession. End footnote. On the reappearance of cholera during the summer of 1849, my mind was peculiarly affected from the belief that a false theory of circulation prevailed, although there was a true theory which, if generally believed, might lead to the knowledge of the cause and cure of this terrific malady, and thus thousands of lives be saved which would otherwise be lost. This thought almost distracted me, and believing that my sex stood in the way of my theories being acknowledged, I sometimes wished that it might please God to take me out of the world. Then, coming to better thoughts, I cast away despondency as unworthy of me, and determined to proceed to the further investigation and development of the great truth, of which I had, as I believed, been made the unworthy recipient. I studied my theory anew while I read the most approved works on cholera, and I came to the belief that imperfect respiration, caused by the want of due oxygen in the air, was the principal predisposing cause of the premonitory symptoms, while the death that supervened was often caused by the settling of carbonic acid gas, the residuum of animal combustion, in the lower air cells of the lungs. The symptoms of the cholera, as treated by the best writers, were full of new proofs of the truth of my theory, especially of its last step, the formation of steam or vapor in the lungs. Without that, the collapse of cholera was a fearful mystery. With it, everything was plain. With a coldness that would collapse the lungs, the bowels must naturally be drawn up, and with dreadful pains, to supply their place. The ghastly change in the face must occur when cold has condensed its arterial vapor. If respiration could restore heat before any lesions had taken place in the organism, the patient might recover. Then I began rewriting my theory in a work afterwards published with the title Respiration and its Effects, especially in relation to Asiatic cholera and other sinking diseases. While thus occupied, the debilitating air of the season weighed upon my health and spirits. I had been affected for about 3 days with what I regarded as the ordinary complaints of the season, when one night, after my family had retired, I found myself suddenly very ill, my symptoms being coldness, debility, and spasmodic pains. I believed myself to be attacked with cholera. I efficiently practiced the artificial respiration in fresh air as before described. Gaining strength as I proceeded, I soon found a death-like coldness giving place to genial warmth. Violent exercise with artificial breathing was kept up some time, with such rests and full free breathings as nature required, after which I slept, perspired profusely, and was well in the morning. This was an occurrence which sunk deep into my mind, and the more so as I could not speak much of it, for the truth was too improbable to be believed. But the successful issue of this, my first experiment upon the dreaded disease, prepared me to act with boldness and efficiency in a case which occurred in my own house about a week after. On the 14th of August, 1849, Jane Fair, an Irishwoman in my service, of about 25 years of age, having been ill for 4 days with diarrhea, was suddenly struck with what the French call cholera foudroyante, from fright. Alarmed by unwanted sounds near her window in a basement room, she mounted the window seat to look out at the top sash, and found her face close to that of a man dying of cholera, who in his death cramps was brought from a steamboat on a litter, and thus rested upon the pavement. The cover was lifted from his face, and the sight and the smell struck her with faintness and trembling, and with difficulty she reached her bed. I was called to go to her quickly by Eliza Fagan, who said that Jane was very bad. She had a clay-cold death look, and a frightful blackness around her eyes. Her face, as I saw it, was livid, pinched in features, and corpse-like, and her pulse but a feeble flutter, and she seemed only to breathe from the top of her lungs. She tried, as she afterwards told me, to say, "I am dying," but her speech was husky and inarticulate. She says her sight and hearing were gone, and while Eliza and I were dragging her out of doors, she could not see the window and did not feel her feet. We placed her in an upright position, with her back resting against a board wall, a fresh breeze blowing full in her face. Her senses were now partially restored. I told her to breathe violently, for she must get the bad air out of her lungs and the good air in, and I showed her how she must do it. At first she said, "I can't, for something rises up in the inside." When I told her sternly that her life depended on it, and she must, she tried to obey me. At first it gave her severe headache, but as soon as deep breathing was fairly begun, while I was watching her face with intense anxiety, the color changed from the clay-cold death look to the full flush of the warm hue of life, and she joyfully exclaimed, "Oh, I feel well!" When the removal of carbonic acid gas had made way for oxygen to be brought to the yet uninjured lungs, the carbon of the venous blood ignited, the motive power was furnished, the blood was again moved forward into the arterial system, and the dammed-up venous current, receiving the suction force, rushed on so violently as at times nearly to produce suffocation. But the struggle was soon over, and the lungs, free both from carbonic acid gas and an unnatural quantity of venous blood, once more received pure air, and to the relieved sufferer respiration became delightful. The circulation passed freely through an unbroken system, and the cholera was cured. A note on cholera from your host in 2024. The true cause of cholera was not understood by the science of the time. The first effective vaccinations were developed in 1885, and the first effective antibiotic was not developed until 1948. Was there, in the whole wide world, another person besides myself who would have taken such a living corpse, dragged it out of doors, and set it upright on feet which could not feel, with the expectation that it might breathe out death, breathe in life, and be restored? The result is a proof, a posteriori, that the theory on which the experiment was made is true. Other cases occurred where, under different circumstances, cures of cholera were effected. One, as instantaneous and in some respects as remarkable as that of Jane Fair, was that of my friend and former pupil, Mrs. General Gould of Rochester, who sent for me, believing herself to be dying of cholera. I have her letter, which, by permission, is published in my work on respiration, and also a letter from her physician, Dr. Bloss of Troy, testifying that her disease was cholera and that he had little hope of her restoration. This letter is published in the appendix of a report on my theory, read in Buffalo August 8, 1851, to a convention of the New York State Association of Teachers. In my journeying to New York City to attend their previous convention in August 1850, an accident obliged me to walk for some distance in the middle of a hot day. The convention sat in Haupt Chapel, which was poorly ventilated, and in the evening I sat under a large gas burner. On entering my room at the New York Hotel, which was on the ground floor, situated where the only air was from a confined central enclosure, I perceived at the only window a strong smell of fresh paint from the outer walls, so that I was obliged to close it. Being excessively fatigued, I slept heavily, till at early dawn I awaked to find myself in a dying state. Attempting to move my arms, they were like lead by my side, and my breath was but a feeble gasp. Without the knowledge of my theory, my bane, as many of my friends have thought, I should then have had no antidote. But I knew where was the destroying agent, and what was the only means by which I had a chance of removing it, and I used the little strength I had left to breathe deeper and then to strive for a better position. Long and doubtful was the struggle. It was 10 o'clock when, with tottering steps, I got into a carriage and sought the free, fresh air, which enabled me to take a little food. In the evening, I went into the teachers' convention, having first ordered from my publisher a sufficient number of my books on respiration to present one to each member, and then, at my request, a committee of investigation was appointed by the convention to report on my theory. They reported favorably to the succeeding convention at Buffalo, which adopted the report, and I published and circulated it. This committee I had been allowed to choose, and it consisted of my friend, Professor Twiss, the first believer in the theory, and Mr. Fellows, that professor of natural philosophy who formerly assisted in making my apparatus. Mr. Fellows carried the report to Buffalo, and when he read it in convention, editors immediately came to him to request copies for the press. But, by the influence of physicians, they afterwards declined it when offered. It seemed to be the general plan of the regular faculty, in the eastern, not the western states, to put the theory into a condition resembling the algid state of cholera, where it would die of coldness. But by the aid of divine providence, it will, like its author, restore itself by its own inherent vitality, the vitality of immortal truth. Stay tuned for the next segment from Theory of Circulation by Respiration by Emma Willard. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg and LibriVox for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.